Hello, dear listener. In tonight's video, we embark on a journey through the bustling streets, magnificent buildings, and the daily lives of the Romans in the captivating world of ancient Rome. Have you ever wondered how people lived their daily lives among the grand buildings and vast roads centuries ago? This video invites you on an extraordinary journey through the streets, markets, baths, and temples of Rome. We will explore how life was shaped in all its aspects, from wealth to poverty, from wars to rituals. As you dive into this story from the depths of the past, you will lose yourself in this ancient world. Are you ready? Then slowly lean back, relax, and let's begin taking slow steps toward the remnants of the past. Ancient Rome. Here life was a period marked by the traces of a complex and rich culture. The greatness and influence of the Roman Empire were shaped not only by military victories, but also by developments that spread across every aspect of daily life. Today, starting from an ordinary day in ancient Rome, we will take a close look at how this great civilization functioned and how everything, from relationships between people to the building blocks of society, came together. The mythological story of Romulus, one of Rome's founders, and his brother Remus is considered the moment when the foundations of Rome were laid. However, at first, Rome was just a small village, and before long, it began expanding with a powerful military structure and effective strategies. One of the most important factors in Rome's growth was the road networks they built. These roads not only facilitated Rome's conquests, but also opened the door to internal and external trade and cultural exchanges. Gradually, Rome transformed from a city into a vast empire spreading across the entire Mediterranean. In daily life, there was a sharp division between the rich and the poor. The nobles, aristocrats, and senators of Rome especially enjoyed living in large villas and setting up lavish feasts. All of this symbolized the authoritative power of the Roman upper class. They ate expensive foods, drank wine, and often used the most valuable spices and flavors before or sometimes during meals. However, for the ordinary people of the city, life was very different, much more difficult. Most of them lived in small, single-room apartments, working and earning just enough to meet their basic needs. The working class made their living working in the fields, workshops, or public works. One of the most striking features of Rome was that entertainment was a large part of life. Gladiator fights were among the most watched events in the arenas. These fights were not only for entertainment purposes, but were also considered a ritual symbolizing Rome's power. In addition to these fights, the people of Rome were also very interested in theater, music, and dance. Theater was an important pastime for the people to relax and enjoy their free time. In theatrical performances, the gods and mythological stories were narrated, and deep reflections on the human condition, from past to present, were made. Life in Rome was essentially a web of interconnected rituals and beliefs. At every corner, there were temples and statues of the gods they worshipped. Romans believed that the gods would protect them and entrusted all of their affairs to the will of the gods. Their beliefs were so strong that some important decisions were made only after consulting astrology. Predictions about the movement of celestial bodies and their effects on Rome could even influence critical decisions, such as governance and wars. Astrologers gained great power, guiding the rulers and shaping the future of Rome. Despite Rome's greatness, its cities were not considered safe. There were many challenges and dangers in urban life. Particularly, diseases were one of the greatest threats faced by the people of ancient Rome. In Rome's crowded cities, sanitation and hygiene were generally poor. While the wealthy built their homes in grand villas, the ordinary people often lived in poor conditions, crowded apartment buildings. These overcrowded and unhygienic environments made it easy for diseases to appear and spread. Rome frequently experienced plagues, malaria, and other contagious diseases. These illnesses could sometimes affect a large portion of the population and cause mass deaths. Particularly during the imperial periods, large plague outbreaks had severely strained Rome. However, there was also a strong sense of solidarity in Roman society. People did not hesitate to help each other. Many cities ran large public services to assist the poor. Public baths were places that appealed to all classes of people, and social interaction was very important there. People gathered in the baths to share their daily lives, trade, and even make business deals. Roman baths were not just for hygiene, they were also a part of social life. Additionally, many innovations emerged in the field of medicine during the Roman era. Romans developed ways to treat diseases and made surgical procedures more professional. They also achieved great success with various medical innovations, such as treatments and antidotes for snake bites. The Roman Empire grew not only through military victories, but also through scientific advances in trade. The social structure, arts, and thinking in Rome left an imprint that affected not only the Mediterranean region, but the entire world. However, behind this magnificent structure, there were times when the people of Rome suffered, endured hardships, and faced challenges. A day in Rome was not just a day, but a story that carried the marks of a whole era and deep meanings. Now, let's begin this story with a morning in ancient Rome. As the sun slowly rose over the stone streets of Rome, the city had already fully awakened. Even in the early hours of the morning, the area around the Forum Romanum would begin to stir. Merchants opening their stalls, slaves hurrying from place to place to carry out their master's orders. In Rome, people started their day early, as it was necessary to complete most tasks before the intense heat set in, and this had become a habit over time, especially during the summer months. Once the sun climbed higher and the heat became overwhelming, life would slow down and people would retreat into shaded areas. The Forum was not just a marketplace, but also the very heart of Rome. It was a place where legal matters were discussed, political decisions were shaped, and trade was conducted. While senators walked with authority in their heavy togas, ordinary citizens gathered around them, eagerly listening to the decisions being made. Within this crowd, figures such as Marcus Tullius Cicero rose to prominence, striving to build a reputation as skilled speakers. Cicero's speeches were not merely political tools in Rome, they were considered an art form. To speak well was to possess power. As the day progressed, the city adopted a different rhythm. Wealthy Romans would begin their day lightly with ientaculum, a simple breakfast, while the main meal, cena, was reserved for the evening. However, such a routine was often not possible for the poor. They typically survived on bread, olives, and cheap wine. Grain, especially wheat imported from Egypt, was of vital importance in Rome and served as a primary food source for the lower classes. For this reason, the state occasionally organized grain distributions known as annona to prevent hunger among the population. This system also served as a powerful tool for emperors to maintain control over the people. Meanwhile, life in the backstreets of Rome was markedly different. People living in multi-story apartment buildings called insula struggled to survive in cramped and crowded conditions. These structures were often built with wood and low-quality materials, making them highly vulnerable to fires. Indeed, the Great Fire of Rome painfully demonstrated just how dangerous they could be. The fire raged for days, destroying a large portion of the city. In its aftermath, Nero ordered the reconstruction of Rome, introducing wider streets and more stone buildings in an effort to reduce future fire risks. Water was one of the most essential elements of life in Rome, and in this regard, the Romans developed extraordinary engineering systems. Aqueducts stretching across vast distances brought clean water into the city. Thanks to this infrastructure, fountains, baths, and private homes had access to water, a remarkable technological achievement for the ancient world. In particular, Sextus Julius Frontinus played a key role in ensuring the efficient operation of these water systems. By midday, the baths would begin to fill. Roman baths were not only places for cleanliness, but also centers of social life. People would bathe, exercise, converse, and conduct business there. Bath culture was one of the rare environments in Roman society where different social classes could interact. With sections such as the hot caldarium, warm tepidarium, and cold frigidarium, these spaces offered both physical and mental relaxation. Yet Rome was not solely a place of order and grandeur. Its unseen side included crime, poverty, and uncertainty. Especially at night, the streets could become dangerous, with theft and assaults becoming more common. For this reason, the wealthy typically avoided going out after dark and made an effort to complete their affairs during daylight hours. At the same time, religious belief permeated every aspect of daily life in Rome. People believed not only in the great gods but also in small household spirits that protected their homes. These household deities, known as Lares and Penates, held an important place in daily rituals. Small offerings, incense, and prayers performed in the morning were essential practices to ensure a peaceful day. As the day went on and the city grew even more crowded, the complex nature of Rome became increasingly evident at every step. On one side stood magnificent temples, on the other, narrow streets marked by poverty. This contrast was one of the fundamental elements that made Rome truly Rome. As the day slowly moved toward midday, the color of Rome's streets began to change. The harsh light of the sun softened into warmer tones, and the marble structures took on a golden glow. These hours transformed into one of the most vibrant moments of the city. Around the Forum in particular, the intensity of the day gave way to a more relaxed and social crowd. People had finished their work and were now beginning to think about how to spend the rest of their day. Wealthy Romans would begin preparing for one of the most important rituals of the day, dinner or cena. This was not merely a meal for nourishment, but a stage where social status was displayed. At banquets held in large villas, guests would recline side by side while eating, attended constantly by slaves. The tables were filled with exotic foods, olive oil from Hispania, spices brought from Africa, and even, according to some sources, unusual delicacies like flamingo tongue. These extravagant feasts were also a direct reflection of Rome's vast trade network. Rome's trade system extended across nearly the entire Mediterranean. The city imported grain from Egypt, marble from Anatolia, spices from India, and silk from China. This extensive network formed the backbone of the Roman economy. In particular, Port of Ostia served as the heart of this trade. Ships arriving there would travel along the Tiber River into the city, carrying goods that met Rome's immense demands. Ships arriving there would travel along the Tiber River into the city, carrying goods that met Rome's immense demands. The system was so advanced that some historians describe Rome as the first global trade center in history. Yet these hours in Rome were not defined solely by the luxurious tables of the elite. For the lower classes, life followed a very different rhythm. Small stalls would open in narrow streets selling hot food. These shops, known as thermopolia, resembled modern fast food establishments. People would eat quickly and practically, trying to recover from the fatigue of the day, especially since many did not even have suitable spaces to cook in their homes. At the same time, the city's entertainment life began to come alive. Theaters started to fill, and street performers gave lively shows. The works of playwrights such as Plautus were especially popular among the public. Comedy plays allowed people to momentarily escape their daily struggles. Humor in Rome also served as a subtle means of criticizing society, and sometimes even the upper classes. Larger spectacles took place in amphitheaters. Although gladiator fights were usually held during the day, these events remained a central topic of evening conversations. In particular, the Colosseum was not only a place of entertainment for the Roman people but also a symbol of imperial power. The games held there were also a way to distract the public from political tensions. When night fell, Rome took on a different identity. Streets lit by torches drifted away from the structured order of the day and transformed into a more chaotic atmosphere. In crowded districts especially, safety became a serious concern. For this reason, night patrols were established. These units, known as the vigiles, were responsible both for firefighting and maintaining public order. This system demonstrated how advanced Rome was in terms of urban organization. Yet beneath all this structure there was always a sense of uncertainty. For the people of Rome, life moved along a fragile balance that could change at any moment. One day could bring wealth and entertainment, while the next could bring disease, fire, or political crisis. At this point, astrology and divination once again came into play in Roman life. Before important state decisions were made, priests known as augurs would interpret the flight patterns of birds. This practice was one of Rome's oldest traditions. Even during the reign of Augustus, such omens were taken seriously. For Romans, the order of the universe was directly connected to human fate. At night, the city would gradually begin to quiet down. While conversations continued in wealthy villas, fatigue weighed more heavily in the neighborhoods of the lower classes. People who had worked all day would retreat into narrow, crowded rooms to rest. Yet Rome was never completely silent at night. The distant sound of footsteps, barking dogs, and occasional shouts served as a reminder that the city, like a living organism, was constantly in motion. As the day moved toward midday, life in Rome began to shift once again. The rush of the morning gave way to a flow that was more intense, yet more structured. The Forum Romanum was still crowded, but now it was no longer just about trade. Serious matters were being discussed. Trials were held, debt disputes were argued, and political alliances were formed. In Rome, law was an inseparable part of daily life, and the system was so advanced that it is still considered a foundation of many modern legal systems. In particular, the 12 Tables marked the first major step in introducing written law to Roman society and played a crucial role in defining the balance between social classes. Around this time, the Senate also became active. Senators, carefully adjusting the folds of their togas, gathered to discuss matters of state. This tradition, rooted in the Republican era, continued to hold influence even during the empire. Although the emperor ultimately had the final say, the Senate still represented the political memory of Rome. The rise of Julius Caesar and the subsequent assassination of Julius Caesar clearly demonstrated how fragile this system could be. After this event, Rome irreversibly moved toward an imperial system. Elsewhere in the city, a very different kind of activity was taking place. Rome's craftsmen continued their work in busy workshops. Blacksmiths forged weapons and tools, potters produced everyday goods, and weavers prepared textiles. This production network was one of the cornerstones of the Roman economy. Considering the needs of the military, these workshops became even more vital. The Roman army was strong not only in battle but also in logistics, and that strength was rooted in the city's production system. At this time of day, the role of slaves became even more visible. Roman society was largely built on slave labor. From household servants to those working in mines, there was a vast system in place. Some slaves were educated. They served as teachers, tutors for children, or accountants. Slaves of Greek origin, in particular, were often preferred for such roles due to their education. However, for most slaves, life was far harsher. Those working in agriculture or heavy labor faced a constant struggle for survival. During this period, Rome's approach to health was also relatively advanced. Although it did not reach the level of modern medicine, the Romans developed practical solutions for many illnesses. In particular, Galen became one of the most influential figures of the time through his work on human anatomy and disease. His theories remained influential for centuries, even being referenced throughout medieval Europe. However, since the true causes of diseases were not fully understood, treatments were often based on trial and error. As the city grew more crowded, issues of hygiene became more apparent. The sewer system, known as the Cloaca Maxima, was used to remove waste and was one of the most advanced infrastructures of the ancient world. Yet even this system was not always sufficient. In densely populated areas, the spread of diseases caused by poor sanitation was often unavoidable. This sometimes led to major outbreaks. For instance, the Antonine Plague severely impacted the Roman Empire, affecting a significant portion of its population. During these hours, temples would also fill with people. Citizens offered sacrifices and prayers to the gods. In Rome, religion was not only a matter of belief, but also an integral part of the state system. Before any important decision, the will of the gods was consulted. For this reason, priests and diviners were held in high regard. Sacrificial ceremonies in particular were among the most important rituals that brought the community together. In the upper parts of the city, a quieter yet more strategic life continued. Decisions made within the imperial palace shaped the fate of Rome. Bureaucrats recorded taxes and evaluated reports coming from the provinces. Rome was not merely a city, it was a vast administrative center. This system controlled a wide geography, stretching from Hispania to Anatolia. Amid all this activity, Rome continued to exist on a balance that was both structured and fragile. Everything was part of an interconnected system. Trade, politics, religion, and daily life were all intertwined. If this connection were to break, the power of Rome itself could falter. And within this complex structure, the city continued to breathe. While all this intensity unfolded within the city, anyone who truly wanted to understand Rome's real power had to look beyond its walls, to the arteries of the empire, because what sustained Rome was not merely the debates in the forum or the decisions made in imperial palaces. Its true strength came from the constant flow of people, goods, and information moving from the periphery toward the center. The most visible expression of this movement revealed itself on the Roman roads. The saying, "all roads lead to Rome," was no exaggeration. These stone-paved, carefully measured, and strategically planned roads enabled rapid military deployment while also ensuring the uninterrupted flow of internal and external trade. At this hour, caravans entering through the city gates drew attention. Marble blocks from Anatolia, sacks of grain from Egypt, olive oil from North Africa, each was part of Rome's vast economic system. Grain, in particular, was vital. Rome's population had exceeded hundreds of thousands, and feeding such a mass required a highly organized system. For this reason, the state strictly controlled grain distribution. A delayed shipment could create unrest in the city, sometimes even spark rebellion. Behind this trade stood a powerful bureaucracy. Taxes were collected, records meticulously kept, and revenues from the provinces were transferred regularly to the center. Among the key figures in this system were the governors. Acting on behalf of the emperor, they were responsible for maintaining order and ensuring economic continuity in the provinces. However, this duty was not always carried out justly. The historian Tacitus openly writes in his works about governors who abused their authority and exploited the people. Such practices were among the internal weaknesses that gradually eroded Rome's strength. Within the city, another dimension of the crowd began to stand out: education and knowledge. In Rome, education, especially for the elite, held great importance. Young men were trained in rhetoric, philosophy, and law, preparing them for roles in the Senate or in state administration. Greek influence played a significant role in this system. While Rome built its military and political dominance, intellectually it drew heavily from the Greek world. At this point, libraries and centers of learning came into prominence. The works of figures such as Vitruvius were regarded as foundational not only in architecture, but also in engineering and urban planning. His work De Architectura was a key source for understanding how Rome managed to build such orderly and functional cities. These ideas did not remain theoretical. They were directly reflected in everyday urban life. Rome's engineering achievements were most evident in its water systems and infrastructure. Beyond aqueducts, its roads, bridges, and sewage systems were also grounded in advanced technical knowledge. This infrastructure was one of the most critical factors behind Rome's longevity. A strong city was not maintained by its army alone, but by the resilience of its systems. Yet beneath all this order, there was an unseen pressure. Rome was an ever-expanding empire, and that expansion brought constant military movement. Soldiers moving through the streets could signal impending campaigns. News arriving from frontier regions was often interpreted as a sign of approaching war. This directly affected daily life. War meant higher taxes and new rounds of conscription. Rome's military strength was built on discipline and organization. The legions were not only fighting forces but also builders, capable of constructing infrastructure, establishing order, and even founding cities when necessary. This versatility allowed Rome to maintain a lasting presence across diverse geographies. However, sustaining such a system required continuous resources, which in turn increased the burden on the population. This constant movement within the city revealed both Rome's strength and its fragility at the same time. Everything appeared to function within a system, yet behind that system lay continuous effort and control. Even a minor disruption could trigger major consequences. And within all this complexity, Rome continued to expand while simultaneously striving to maintain order within itself. There was another face of Rome, the state of its people's spirit. Life in Rome was not merely a matter of physical order. It was a complex fabric where emotions, fears, and expectations intertwined. The people walking through crowded streets were not only occupied with trade or daily work. Each of them also sensed the direction in which the empire was heading. In the narrow streets, small rumors spread in whispers, quickly turning into widespread curiosity. Especially when military activity increased, the atmosphere of the city would shift immediately. During such times, the Circus Maximus drew particular attention. The chariot races held there were among the most captivating events for the public. Yet these races were more than simple entertainment. Fan groups formed around the red, blue, green, and white teams, sometimes evolving into political identities. The crowds would erupt with excitement, shouting, cheering, and at times losing control. In Rome, the connection between entertainment and mass psychology was remarkably strong. These events brought together people from different social classes. The wealthy sat in their private boxes while the common people filled the stands. What united them all was the shared thrill of the moment. For emperors, such spectacles were also crucial. Guiding public attention and maintaining satisfaction were essential for sustaining power. The principle of panem et circenses, bread and circuses, played a vital role in preserving Rome's social balance. Meanwhile, in the quieter parts of the city, a different kind of activity unfolded. Rome's intellectual circles gathered in homes or small assemblies to discuss philosophy and science. Schools of thought such as Stoicism and Epicureanism were becoming increasingly influential. Stoic philosophers advised resilience in the face of hardship and control over one's emotions, while Epicureans advocated for a simpler, more tranquil life. One of the most prominent representatives of these philosophies was Seneca. Not only a thinker but also a statesman, Seneca served as an advisor to Emperor Nero. In his writings, he focused on the inner life of individuals, emphasizing the fleeting nature of power and authority. His ideas served as a guide for those who did not wish to lose themselves in Rome's grandeur. However, freedom of thought in Rome was not always secure. Ideas that could threaten imperial authority were closely monitored. As a result, many thinkers chose to express their views indirectly. This reveals how delicate and at times concealed the intellectual life of Rome truly was. In another part of the city, religious rituals continued uninterrupted. In Rome, religion was not only a personal belief system, but also a fundamental pillar of the state. Ceremonies held in grand temples reinforced a sense of unity within society. The Temple of Jupiter, in particular, stood as one of the central locations for such rituals. The sacrifices performed there were not merely offerings to the gods, but symbolic acts intended to ensure the continuation of Rome's order. The methods used in these rituals were equally striking. The internal organs of sacrificed animals were examined to search for signs about the future. This practice reflected the strength of Rome's belief in fate. People understood that they could not control the course of life, yet they still sought to interpret it in their own way. Amid this intense urban life, disease and death were ever-present realities. Especially for those living in crowded districts, life expectancy was relatively low. The average Roman lived around 30 to 40 years, a consequence of high child mortality rates and frequent epidemics. This reality shaped how people viewed life. Death was not a distant concept for ordinary Romans. It was an everyday presence. For this reason, funeral ceremonies held great importance. Families organized elaborate rituals to honor the deceased. Among the elite, ancestral masks were used to represent the faces of forebears, reminding the living of previous generations. This tradition reflected the deep-rooted family structure of Rome and the significance it placed on lineage. The city existed in all these dimensions at once: entertainment, thought, belief, and death, all intertwined, forming a structure that seemed to feed into itself. As the intensity of midday slowly began to fade, the daily rhythm of Rome started to reveal a harsher and more realistic face. For the empire stood not only on the order within the city, but also on an ongoing struggle beyond its borders. The sense of stability felt in the heart of Rome was, in fact, preserved thousands of kilometers away by the discipline of its legions. and for the continuation of that order, war was an unavoidable reality. During this period, the greatest strength of the Roman army was not merely its numbers, but its organizational capability. The legions moved within a strict system, and every soldier fulfilled his role with precision. The conflicts along the Germanic frontier, in particular, had posed a serious test for Rome. The Battle of the Teutoburg Forest in 9 AD dealt a heavy blow to the empire's military power. 3 Roman legions were completely annihilated by a sudden and well-coordinated attack from Germanic tribes. This defeat was not only a military loss, but also a psychological fracture for Rome. Until then, it had been seen as an invincible force. It is said that after this event, Emperor Augustus cried out, "Varus, give me back my legions," a statement that reflects the depth of the shock experienced by the empire. Following this loss, Rome was forced to change its strategy. It tightened control over its borders and strengthened its defensive lines. The military zones established along the Rhine and Danube rivers became natural barriers marking the empire's northern frontier. Soldiers stationed along these lines were not only responsible for defense, but also played a role in spreading Roman culture in those regions. However, the north was not the only front Rome had to contend with. In the east stood a far more organized and powerful rival, the Parthian Empire. The struggle between these two powers became a long-standing balance of conflict. The region of Mesopotamia, in particular, was at the center of these confrontations. The battles between Roman legions and Parthian cavalry differed greatly in terms of tactics. Rome's disciplined infantry often struggled against the speed and mobility of Parthian mounted archers. One of the most striking examples of these conflicts was the Battle of Carrhae. In this battle, one of Rome's prominent commanders, Marcus Licinius Crassus, suffered a devastating defeat and lost his life. This event forced Rome to reconsider and reshape its eastern policies. It became clear that victory would not always come easily. Another defining strength of Rome, alongside its military power, was its logistical capability. The movement of a legion did not simply mean the advance of soldiers. It required the organized transport of food, water, weapons, and equipment. For this reason, the Roman army established temporary camps wherever it went, often organizing them like small, orderly cities. Everything was planned, every detail was considered in advance. This military discipline was a source of pride for Roman citizens. People in the city closely followed the successes of the legions. When news of victory arrived, grand celebrations were held in Rome. Triumphs organized for generals left lasting impressions on public memory. During these processions, captured spoils were displayed, and prisoners were paraded before the people. These spectacles served as powerful demonstrations of Rome's might. Yet there was also an unseen side to these victories. Wars were not confined to the battlefield. Their effects reached deep into the streets of Rome. Long campaigns kept soldiers away from their families, impacting the social structure. Moreover, the economic burden brought by warfare sometimes made daily life more difficult for the population. As Rome expanded, diverse cultures became part of the empire. This transformed Rome into not only a military power but also a cultural mosaic. People from conquered lands brought new customs, beliefs, and ways of life into the city. While this diversity enriched Rome, it also created a complex structure that required careful management. All these developments showed that Rome was not merely a city but a living organism, constantly evolving and adapting. Every victory brought new responsibilities. Every loss left behind new lessons. And as long as Rome could maintain this balance, it continued to stand strong. As the rhythm of Rome's streets slowly shifted in the afternoon, one of the empire's most powerful yet invisible mechanisms continued to operate quietly: its system of governance and law. It was not only the armies that kept Rome standing. The administrative structure established both in the city and across the provinces held this vast empire together. Managing an empire of millions required not just a kuua, but also a just order and a functioning system. The foundations of Roman law dated back much earlier, to the period of the Republic. Over time, however, this system became more complex and more inclusive. Disputes between citizens, commercial conflicts, debt issues, and even family matters were resolved within clearly defined legal frameworks. One of the most significant features of this system was that it was written. The clear codification of rules aimed to prevent arbitrary decisions. During the imperial era, this system developed even further. Especially under Emperor Hadrian, the legal structure was reviewed and made more systematic. Hadrian sought to strengthen central authority by limiting the powers of provincial governors. One of Rome's greatest challenges had been that officials in distant regions sometimes prioritized their own interests. Provincial administration played a critical role across Rome's vast geography. Each province was governed by a governor who held both military and administrative authority. Although these powers appeared nearly unlimited in theory, they were closely monitored. Rome depended on the steady collection of taxes from the provinces, and any disruption, whether in taxation or local stability, could undermine the system and directly affect the balance of the empire. The tax system was one of Rome's most sensitive issues. It was both the primary source of state revenue and one of the areas most criticized by the population. Taxes were often collected through local intermediaries, which created opportunities for abuse. In some provinces, the burden became so heavy that it pushed communities to the brink of rebellion. One of the most striking examples of such tension was the Boudiccan Revolt. In Britain, local populations rose up against Rome's harsh taxation and rigid rule. Led by Boudica, the rebels attacked Roman cities and caused significant destruction. This event clearly demonstrated how carefully Rome needed to manage its provinces. Roman law extended beyond citizens to include slaves and foreigners, forming a broad legal framework. However, this inclusivity did not mean equality. Roman society was sharply divided into classes, and these distinctions were reflected in the law. There was a vast gap between the rights of a Roman citizen and those of a slave. Even so, Roman law is considered highly advanced for its time. The rules developed in areas such as contracts, property rights, and commercial regulation influenced legal systems for centuries. Even today, traces of Roman law can be seen in the foundations of modern legal systems. As the empire expanded, diverse peoples and cultures became part of this system. This required the law to be more flexible and adaptable. Rather than imposing identical rules everywhere, Rome adopted an approach that took local traditions into account. In doing so, it preserved its authority while keeping diverse communities integrated within the system. Yet this balance was not always maintained. During periods of crisis, the legal system could become a tool of oppression. As imperial power grew, certain decisions began to surpass the boundaries of law. This became more evident in the later stages of the empire. As power centralized, the flexibility of the system diminished. Rome's strength came not only from the sword, but also from its rules. These rules were felt even in the most distant corners of the empire. From a merchant's agreement to a soldier's orders, everything was part of this vast system. As the day progressed and the crowds in Rome began to thin, the unseen gears of this immense order continued to turn, quietly, systematically, and with determination. And it was precisely Blagodaria this order that Rome managed to endure for centuries. As the chaos of the day slowly withdrew, the coolness of the evening settled over Rome. As the sun dipped beyond the banks of the Tiber, a different kind of movement began to take shape in the city. The trade, court proceedings, official duties, and all the activity of the day gave way to a quieter yet deeper stretch of time. People retreated into their homes while the streets were left mostly to soldiers, guards, and late travelers. These hours revealed not only Rome's visible face, but also its inner world. Thoughts and concerns that had been suppressed throughout the day became more pronounced in the stillness of the evening. News arriving from the empire's frontiers always carried a sense of uncertainty and unease for those living in the city. No matter how powerful Rome appeared, it was widely understood that this power required constant preservation. Toward the later periods of the empire, this uncertainty became even more tangible. The crisis of the 3rd century clearly demonstrated how fragile Rome could be. Power struggles, economic instability, and external invasions combined to shake the empire deeply. During this time, emperors changed rapidly and central authority weakened. One of the most striking moments of this turmoil was the sack of Rome in 410. Under the command of Alaric, the Visigoths entered the city and plundered it. This event revealed that Rome, long regarded as untouchable, had in fact become vulnerable. The city was not completely destroyed, but the psychological dominance it held over the world was profoundly shaken. As the darkness of evening deepened, such stories were not merely remnants of the past for the people of Rome. They served as warnings. It had become clear that no matter how vast an empire might be, it could not fully resist the forces of time and change. Someone walking through Rome's streets at this hour would feel an atmosphere entirely different from the noise of the day. Fewer sounds, fewer people, but more thought. For this city carried not only the lives of the present, but also the weight of its past. Every corner, every street stood as a silent witness to countless events that had unfolded before. Evenings in Rome were also a time when faith was felt more intensely. People performed small rituals in their homes, prayed to the gods, and sought their protection. They understood how quickly life could change. One day could bring news of victory, the next, disaster. In the later periods of the empire, such reports of disaster became more frequent. The reforms implemented during the reign of Diocletian were an attempt to bring order to this chaos. The empire was divided and governance was reorganized in a more systematic way. These changes signaled that the old structure of Rome was gradually losing its strength. Yet despite all these transformations, daily life in Rome continued. People ate their meals, spent time with their families, and prepared for sleep without knowing what the next day would bring. Life flowed on, independent of the fate of empires. When night fully fell, Rome grew quiet. The distant echo of footsteps, the faint clink of soldiers' armor as they stood watch, and the wind moving through narrow streets. All of it signaled that the day had come to an end. Rome was still standing, with all its victories, all its losses, and all its stories. And so we have come to the end of a day in ancient Rome. From the first light of sunrise to the quiet of evening, we have witnessed not only the grandeur of this vast empire, but also the people within it, their struggles and the fragile balances they lived by. Rome was not merely the story of victories, armies, and emperors. It was also the name of a life rebuilt each day by ordinary people, slaves, merchants, soldiers, and families. Perhaps what made Rome truly powerful was not just the wars it won, but its ability to endure, no matter the circumstances. Time has changed, empires have risen and fallen, yet the human struggle to survive, the search for hope, and the longing for tomorrow have never changed. Now, as the streets of Rome sink into silence after this long day, you gently return to your own time. If this journey resonated with you, don't forget to like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel, because there are many more cities to explore and many more stories to tell. See you in the next video. Good night.